Meeting for the East Greenbush Central School District. Stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We got a full house today. We appreciate having a large crowd here. So we did the Pledge of Allegiance. First, we're going to hear from Cole Hardy and Natalie Crescendo.
Good evening, everyone. We hope you all had a wonderful week so far. In Student Council, we've been working hard to coordinate our upcoming Spirit Week, which starts next Monday. This year's theme is a fun mix of St. Patrick's Day and March Madness, designed to bring some excitement to this time of year, which can feel a little slow. To make things even more fun, we'll be selling themed spirit packs, perfect for amplifying participation and ensuring everyone can join in on the festivities.
We've also been finalizing the details for our end of the year field trip. We voted last week and we're all going to be headed to the American Dream Mall in New Jersey. So it's a good way for us to say thank you to our active members in Student Council. Additionally, we've been preparing for our upcoming blood drive on March 28th. We want to get as many people involved as possible, so signups will be held outside of the cafeteria towards the end of the week. Plus, PIG classes are encouraging students to participate by offering 3 hours of community service for donating.
Lastly, we're gearing up for the annual leadership conference at Proctor's this year. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to take our executive council along with 5 of our most active student council members to represent our school. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope you all have a amazing rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next up is approval of the draft minutes. There we go. All right, so we have Mark Mann was absent and Ms. O'Brien, Mr. Mann was absent. So any questions about the draft minutes? All right, is there a motion to approve? Ms. I'm drawing blank. I'm sorry, Ms. Phillips. Yes, absolutely. And Ms. Komersky is second. Everyone in favor? And everyone abstaining? All right, Ms. O'Brien, Mr. Mann, no no's. Excellent. That motion passes. Here. All right, so starting off with this board forum, I'm gonna start off on my right, Ms. Steinbach. All right, Ms. Phillips.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. O'Brien.
Just shout out to a lot of our female student athletes. We had, winners in female wrestling at the state level. I know the girls basketball team went quite far and got some commendations, and the 4x400 girls at the state track finals. So I think we'll be inviting them later this year, but just congrats to all those student athletes.
Ms. Turner.
Just hope everybody got to catch the high school musical, and the golf musical will be coming up.
I think
This weekend, is it not?
I think it's this weekend. Yeah.
It's in my brain, but I'll get there when I get there. So, yes, so hopefully everybody can go see golf too.
No, I just want to wish I hope everyone had a wonderful spring. Set your clocks forward if you haven't already. Right. But no, it's great to see everyone. Love seeing people out there supporting and finding ways to support you as well, Mr. Mann. Yeah.
So just want to provide the community with an update on the Serpent search. The board did meet yesterday evening to discuss the applicants. We had 26 applications, a lot of administrative experience, educational experience. In fact, our Questar search consultant, was helping us calculate. They had about 575 years of total experience as a group, which included superintendents, assistant superintendents, etc. We did spend a lot of time with our consultant Questar, like I said yesterday, and we have narrowed it down to a smaller group. And those individuals will be invited to interview first round beginning early next week, Monday and Tuesday evening. So depending on how that comes out, and we'll be proceeding from there as part of our search process. So looking forward to the next steps in the process.
Just a shout out for the Education Foundation Gala. It's coming up at the end of the month on the 28th. And Jen's mother's being recognized as well for community service. So thank you. A lot of great people going into the Hall of Fame, and hopefully people can make it. It's a great event. It's fun, and it really helps to provide opportunities for our students.
Thank you.
I'm all set.
All right, so moving on to the public forum. I'll read our preface here. Residents, students, employees, and business representatives of the East Greenbush Central School District may address the board on matters concerning programs and/or operations of the district, other than matters involving personnel. Members of the board do not directly respond to citizen concerns during the public forum. If a response is appropriate, either the president or the superintendent will contact the individual in the near future. Those persons wishing to address the board will be recognized by the chair of the meeting and should state for the record their name and address or affiliation with the district or business. While the board does not wish to infringe upon free speech protections, it must be stressed that the visitors forum is not determined to be an open forum. The board president will conduct the forum for the orderly and efficient operation of board business. In addition, any remarks which may be considered defamatory or stigmatizing are prohibited and will be declared out of order. All comments shall be limited to 5 minutes. Is there any questions? Any comments or any of the above? Mr. Grignon.
Good evening, everyone.
Good
I'm
evening.
Wayne Grignon, principal of Janae Elementary School. Just wanted to provide an open invitation to the Board of Education. We have two wonderful events at Janae that are coming up. One is tomorrow evening at Janae, starting in our auditorium. Will be our annual Janae Family Reading event. And for our kickoff, we will have the Questar principal of our pre-K programs, Mr. Mike Burns, will be there because he is also a published author, and he'll be reading his story and talking about his journey to becoming an author, Nervous Wreck. So that will begin at 5:30 in our auditorium. And then you're also welcome to enjoy some refreshments at the end by our PTO, some cookies and some water while we track our log minutes for the Ronald McDonald House. Additionally, just want to offer, because there's many families that are from Janae that are on the Board of Education. We have our annual lip sync event happening on April 4th, right here at Janae, if you're interested. You can also pick a song and participate if you want. Registration closes tomorrow. But that's always a wonderful event for our school community, and you're also welcome to attend that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What about, should we do a board song? No.
Well, yeah, we're all
Mars.
for that, Emily.
Okay, fine.
The teachers usually do one.
Maybe next year.
A little more prep time.
Emily, I learned of a tool that can do that through AI for you.
Oh, yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
yeah?
I saw that. Yeah,
You
yeah, for
can
sure.
turn any document into a country song or a rock song or anything of that nature. So, if you need help in
Let's
that
take a
area,
paragraph from our manual or something.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great segue into absolutely our 2025, 2026 budget presentation.
So we'll pick the song after you hear the presentation.
Can you sing it a little bit better?
It's on, Peter. Is this on? Okay, good evening, everyone. Jennifer Mulligan, our Director of Business and Finance, and I are going to present the budget together this evening. For those of you who have attended budget presentations in the past, including those board members that have been with us for a while, we changed the structure of this a little bit And what I wanted to say up front is this is our first word on the budget, but it's certainly not our last. We will be having many conversations between now and the date at which the board has to adopt the budget to recommend to the community, which is April 22nd. So this is our starting point. It's a way to take a look at if we took everything that we're doing right now in terms of staffing, personnel, programs, and carried it forward next year, what would it cost? There's lots of adjustments that need to be made between now and the final budget. But this is a starting point that we picked this year to provide the board with what's called a rollover budget, because our context is changed over the course of the last few years as we approach the 25-26 budget. Some of this will be new information for those of you who have not participated, but for some of the board, they've seen some of this information in January when we did a preliminary conversation about the budget, and last year as we presented some of the concerns in the budget. So we're presenting a rollover budget to start the year and the budget cycle. I don't know if this is working, Peter. Okay. So one of the things we're going to do up front is provide some historical. Peter, you're going to have to advance for me. Historical information. We'll be presenting some information regarding our board's effort to keep the taxpayers in mind in terms of keeping the tax levy increases very low over the course of the last several years. In fact, one of the lowest in the region. We'll also be presenting some information about what our budget is looking like, our expenses are looking like moving forward, and our revenues, and where we've been and where we anticipate we're going to have to go. We'll give you a preliminary budget overview, and that'll take a look at our overall estimated expenses next year, again, in a rollover budget, carrying everything forward, and the difference between those expenses and our projected revenues, which would include the state aid that we know about as of this point, which is the governor's executive budget proposal, which was adjusted slightly in February for our district when new inflation information came in. And we'll talk about that, adjusted down slightly for East Greenbush. I don't know exactly what the number was, about $50,000. Okay. We'll also talk about some of the main expenditure drivers, what's driving up the cost of operating a school district. In some cases, the trends are concerning, particularly in the area of employee benefits. We'll talk about what's happening right now and what we might be able to do about it, or what we're trying to do about it. But the major expense drivers generally fall in the category of salary and employee benefits, with the big one being health insurance. Additionally, we will look at our projections for where we are at with fund balance projections for the end of the current year, 24-25, and we are operating with a projected deficit in the current year of approximately $2 million. It's a little bit better scenario than what was projected earlier in the year, but it's still a concern as we start to erode fund balance and as our expenses are going up. We'll talk about next steps, and we'll also have to look at the calendar a little bit, because I know the board is very busy right now, but we do want to make sure that we have at least 3 opportunities to talk about the budget before the board adopts the final budget. So looking at our taxes historically, we're always mindful of the impact of the school district's expenses on our taxpayers, but as we approach the budget, we also have to be mindful of what we've accomplished over the last several years. We're one of the top achieving districts in the capital region. We've received recognition for the quality of our teachers, our programs, and the excellence that our students achieve. So we've come a long way, and we've been able to progress as a district, and we've bounced back from the pandemic very, very well, and particularly compared to other districts. So we made some investments to be able to accomplish those achievements, and we did so in a way that kept the tax levy very, very low for our taxpayers. In fact, over the last 4 budgets, the average yearly tax increase in the tax levy has been 0.26%. And again, very, very low. We're entering in a year where that is not going to be possible. Okay, we're entering into a year where I will be recommending to go up to at least the tax cap, if not exceed the tax cap. And we'll talk about why in just a bit.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I wanted to provide an update. Back in January, I provided a preliminary tax cap calculation. There was one item that provided for a slight adjustment, information that we didn't have at the time that was presented. So this is basically brings you through the tax cap calculation. It starts with our prior year tax levy. The tax levy can grow by our tax base growth factor, which is that 1.0057 that's provided by the New York State Department of Tax and Finance, and basically represents what the growth in assessed value is in the district. So in other words, there's been some growth in the district, so you're able to levy some additional taxes related to that. Then part of the calculation is looking at the items that you have other revenue sources for, that the levy may not need to pay for. So we have pilot revenues, which is payments in lieu of taxes. So part of that calculation is taking out the prior year number and then adding back, the current year number for that adjustment. So in theory, if we're going to collect less pilot revenues in the ensuing year, we would be able to levy those as additional revenues through the tax levy. The other component of that is the capital tax exclusion, which basically addresses all the capital related items within the district. So we have debt service for past capital projects, and in this budget, debt service related to the new capital project. We also have some rent and capital expenses associated with the BOCES, Questar 3. And then we also have some expenses related to our bus purchases. However, the bus purchases are currently being funded through state aid we receive, and also the reserve fund that we have for buses. So basically, we also receive building aid. So building aid is supporting the debt service on those capital exclusion numbers. So there's some adjustments there. Basically, the tax levy limit is 3.19%. Back in January, it was 3.21. So it was adjusted down by about $13,000 because we received the BOCES capital exclusion numbers. So there was just a slight adjustment there. The one thing I wanted to point out just on the right hand of the slide is that pilot revenues are estimated to decrease going into next year. And that's due to a couple of pilot agreements that are expiring. That is allowing an additional $300,000 in the tax levy. But in the revenue budget, you're going to see a reduction in that pilot revenue line. So in effect, although that tax levy limit is providing $1.8 million of additional taxes, the net impact between the pilot revenue and the property tax levy increases about $1.5 million. Okay.
So the rollover budget provides a baseline to work from as we move into 25, 26. We're highlighting the cost of current services and staffing that we're providing our students. We are projecting a structural budget deficit. I'll explain a little bit more about that because that does not take into account any decisions that the board may make regarding appropriating reserves or use of fund balance. It's a starting point, as I began this presentation with. It's not the end point. There's lots of work to be done. It also moves forward any contractual obligations that we have for our employee contracts, as well as uses what revenue projection information is available for us at this time. The revenues, since the governor's budget has came out, have been adjusted a little bit because when that state aid run comes out, some of the expense-driven aids, like transportation aid, BOCES aid, they are based on the state's estimate of what we're going to be spending this year, which drives those aids to come to the district next year. We looked at our actual expenses, and so we plug into our budget what we believe the actual expense-driven aids will be, not based on the state's estimate, but based on our actual accounting of what's happening in the district this year.
Jeff, quick question.
Yeah.
For Jen. When you say current staffing levels, can you tell me if that's encumbered positions, even if they're vacant right now? It includes all positions that are budgeted for, even
Yes,
if they may be vacant.
that is correct.
That is correct. Yeah. And it does not include any requests, new programs, initiatives that have been submitted either by the administrators or by staff. There's nothing been added to the budget next year that's not in the budget this year, with the exception of summer school, which we've talked about in the past, and I'll talk about it again. So as we look at our preliminary budget overview, the current budget, the current year that we're operating our programs in right now, budget is $111.7 million. The revenue that's funding the budget this year, which the primary sources of revenue are state aid, pilot revenues, and local property taxes, 104.4. So the gap between those two, not counting any appropriated reserves, not counting the fund balance, it's actually the fund balance and the reserves added together represents the gap of $7.3 million. Moving forward to next year, again, in the rollover budget, we're projecting $118.6 million budget. We're projecting revenue at $106.6 million, increasing the gap to $12 million. And again, we haven't plugged in any reserves. We haven't plugged in any use of fund balance. So that increase is a $6.9 million increase. To be honest, that's too high. We need to work on that and we need to get that down. That represents about a 6.2% increase moving forward to next year. On average, over the last several years, the budget to budget increase moving forward from one year to the next year has been about 3%. So that's our benchmark that we're working within. We don't know if we can hit it, but just to be upfront, that 6.2% increase in the budget is going to have to come down. We just can't afford that. The proposed tax levy in the budget is at the cap that Jennifer spoke about at 3.19%. And again, that includes the foundation aid that is included in the executive budget, the 3.19% tax levy increase and other revenues, including the pilots and miscellaneous revenues. I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
So basically just carrying this forward, the previous slide, you saw that structural budget deficit. So the slide is bringing that forward. So how has that structural budget deficit been closed? Now we're talking about budget. We're not talking about our actual revenues and our actual expenses, right? When we're talking about a budget, it's a spending plan that's supported by revenues and potentially fund balance and reserves, some savings, right? So, you know, there are conservative estimates in revenues and there are conservative estimates in expenses. You know, as Mr. Buno had just mentioned, are vacant positions included? Yes, that is the case. You know, there will need to be an evaluation of how we handle that. So when we look at the structural budget deficit in 24-25, $7.3 million. So that's the difference between the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenses. So the expenses are higher than the revenues that are anticipated. So with the 24-25 budget, one of the new items that was brought in was appropriating the reserves. And that is on the appropriated reserve line. We're appropriating approximately $700,000. So this year's budget is going to be supported by reserves of $700,000. Then in addition, there's appropriated fund balance. Now, this has been a line that's been in the district's budget for many years. And you're going to see on a future slide how we haven't encroached on that, basically. Okay. So looking forward, and there's going to be many more conversations about fund balance and reserves and how is that going to be handled, you know, in this year's budget.
Just,
yep.
Is it 7.3 million?
7.3 million.
Okay, because I think it's 730,000.
No,
Okay,
yes, it's in millions. All these numbers are in millions.
Thank you.
So the appropriated reserves is about 700,000.
Got it.
And then 6.6 million.
Got it. Okay. That's what I was reading.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry.
So looking forward, you know, we're looking at increasing the appropriation of our reserves. Again, we need to have conversations about that. We need to look, what does that do, you know, down the road? And then also the appropriated fund balance. You know, what are our results? We're going to be looking at doing some projections in the next budget cycle out a few more years to see, you know, what is anticipated and how, you know, what those reserves and savings will look like down the road. So there is a plan to increase the appropriation of the reserves and then a plan to begin decreasing that appropriated fund balance, because this year we're going to begin to spend that. So we now need, before we haven't, but now we are. So we are going to need to decrease that alliance because over time that will continue to be depleted when we're looking at on the previous slide that the revenue increase of 2.2 million is not covering the 6.9 million in increased budgeted expenditures.
Excuse me, Ms. Mulligan.
Yes.
Are you saying that so the difference between the 12 million and the 6.5 is that one is just taking no reserves into the picture at all?
So the 12 million is no reserves or fund balance in the picture.
Okay.
Okay. So this year's budget at today is looking at using $5.5 million of fund balance and reserve, which brings that
So you're showing an adjusted.
An
so the
adjusted.
Structural deficit is without any extra money operating to all revenues coming in at that point in time. And then you're saying how it looks after applying reserves,
yes.
right? To change the way that we can view it and manage the deficit effectively, right? Okay.
Right. It's basically looking at what are those revenues, those taxes, the state aid, the
Yeah.
pilot revenues, and other miscellaneous revenues. How are they supporting
Okay.
the spending plan?
Thank you.
Okay.
All things being equal,
Yes.
for this-
Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
programmatic and
Correct.
Yes.
CSA,
That's correct.
Yes,
That's
that's
correct.
correct.
with no changes.
That's right.
So basically, after applying a reduced plan in using fund balance and reserves overall, that gives us a remaining $6.5 million budget gap. So basically, the budgeted expenditures are exceeding the budgeted revenues by 4.7 million. Then you add on top of that a reduced reliance on fund balance, some increase in reserves of 1.8 million. And that's how you get to 6.5, which is what the gap is with utilization of some fund balance and reserves.
Ms. Mulligan, I'm wondering flexibility wise, by spending 5 million in reserves, how does that make our future decisions looking beyond this year?
So we're going to get into some more
Okay,
details
show
a
you that.
little
Okay.
bit more. And then at our next meeting, we're planning to bring a multi-year look
Okay.
on that.
All right.
Okay.
So this graph should look familiar to you. We've updated it based on current information. We presented something similar in January. We presented something last year as part of the budget discussion at our first budget meeting or second budget workshop, I believe it was, at Red Mill School. Just in general, I just want to say a few things about this for those that might not be able to see the print. The blue line trajectory represents the budget. That's the plan. That's not necessarily all of our expenses. It's the budget amount since 2021 going through current 24, 25 and projected into next year. The green line represents our revenues, the money coming into the budget. And you can see the difference between the budget and the revenues. There was a period of time that you can see from looking at the red line where the green line was higher than the red line, which meant that our revenues coming into the district exceeded our expenses. And so that's when you accumulate surplus. But as the trajectory was going forward and as we kept our tax levy increases low, we had received some additional foundation aid, we added some programs and expenses. You can see that the red line comes in and at a point entering into currently moving into this current year, our expenses are exceeding our revenues. We're spending more than what we're taking in. And I'll let Jen detail the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as Mr. Simons pointed out, the blue line's the budget. The green revenue and the red expenditures is different than what we were just talking about. Okay. We were talking about budget before. This is actually projecting actual expenses and revenue. So obviously the blue line is higher than these numbers, right? Because we're again budgeting conservatively on our revenues and budgeting conservatively on our expenditures. So going in and there was a slight improvement actually from January because more time has gone by. So in January, when I presented what our outlook was going to be for the current year, 24-25, that was using November data. So more time has gone by. That included assumptions with filling vacancies. So we haven't filled some of those yet. So there's been some adjustments of that. Back in January, there was a projection that we'd be spending about $3.9 million of operating deficit that would be partially supported by reserves and then partially supported by fund balance that's not earmarked for anything.
Ms. Mulligan, I'm just curious, when did you start here? Reason why I ask, because I noticed it started narrowing fairly recently from the budgeted to, not to detract from the conversation, but I just noticed it narrowed very recently, the budgeted to the actual expenditures. And I was just curious if our estimates have become more accurate over time is what,
I think what's happened is our budget, our
Yes.
actual expenditures are closer to our budget.
Yes.
As we had said before, that $6.8 million fund balance was the difference between the budget and the expenses for many, many years. And when Jen came in, I asked her to give us a more realistic
Okay.
picture
Change in
of
methodology.
our expenses and to try to be more forthcoming and transparent about what our actual expenses are related to our budget so that we could start to inform ourselves regarding the development of a reserve plan. So that's the trend line indicates basically that during the last few years prior to really the current year, we added expenses and were able to do so within the budget without adding it on top of the budget. For example, health insurance.
Yep.
Health insurance increases were not completely added to the top of the budget. We had room within that budget, but that level of cushion has gone down to the point now that it isn't there.
'Cause it
We're
looks like,
actually
yeah.
more aligned in
Yes,
our
that's what it's
expenses
looking
with
like.
our budget.
That's what it's looking like. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
But I definitely think it's the credit, Ms.
And she's more exacting.
Yes, that we're doing well in our calcalizations. Yes.
Jen, do we have that number, that projected expenditure number?
Yes.
There,
So,
where's that?
so what I was, yes, I do. So back in January, I was saying that, projected deficit was about $3.9 million funded. So after that's been refined, Mr. Simons mentioned a $2.4 million deficit. I'm going to just elaborate on that a little bit more. The actual complete total picture deficit is about $3 million. Okay. It's going to be supported by the reserves we had planned to be appropriated, about 700,000. And then the remaining 2.4 million that Mr. Simons mentioned is taking out of our undesignated fund balance. It's not earmarked for anything. Okay, so the operating deficit is about projected to be about just under $3.1 million, supported by $680,000 in reserves and $2.4 million in non-designated fund balance. So when we're looking at that, what total expenditures does that entail? It's about $109+ million. That is the total expenditures that are projected for 24-25. Yes, 109.2 million is the total anticipated expenditures with revenues of $106 million. So that's your $3 million difference. Okay, going into 25-26, now we have that rollover budget. Okay, so that rollover budget was prepared with understanding the contractual salary increases, the employee benefit increases, and then applied those increased percentages based on what the projected actual is this year, which is why it's still below the budget, okay? Because there's still a spending plan that's conservative that needs to allow for flexibility. For example, like the DPS hot water project that we have going on where some things are unanticipated. A new student comes into the district that needs certain supports, we have to be able to plan and adjust with those things.
So for those students that are here and listening to this, one of the things that school superintendents are always mindful of in working with boards and the community is to overestimate how much you're going to spend and underestimate how much you're going to take in. The 6.8 that we were talking about before was perhaps a little bit too overestimating on the expense side, so we were able to add some things that we did over the last few years, and a lot of it was primarily related to helping the students recover from COVID with some academic support, some mental health support, and all those kinds of things. We were able to add some of those things because there was room in that budget to bring our expenses a little bit higher to provide programs and services for students. Our sources of revenue, our main source of revenue in a district like East Greenbush are the real property taxes, which is about 51.3% of our money that we take into the budget. State aid represents about 32% of the revenue. And you can see that over the last few years, not necessarily in this graph, that the portion of the budget supported by state aid has been concerning to the district. as the expenses have gone up. Our pilot revenues, these are arrangements that are made by the Industrial Development Agency of Rensselaer County to abate taxes for businesses, to provide growth incentives in terms of job retention and job increases. Other revenues include such things as Medicaid that we are reimbursed for in terms of services that we provide for certain students. And then our fund balance represents about 4.2 million or 3.5% of our budget. And then our reserves are at about 1.1%. So we added something to this to show the budget gap right now, which is represented by the kind of the gold color, is about 5.5%. One thing that I want to point out is 88% of the district's revenue are recurring revenues. Actually, property taxes, pilots, and state aid represent about 88% of our revenues. Oh,
Typo there. I'm
oh,
sorry.
okay, 98. I thought maybe it was my
No, that
not
was
wearing my
mine.
glasses. This is yours.
Okay, all right. So just diving into the details of revenue. Overall, the revenue, budgeted revenue increase is about 2.1%. Real property taxes are at the tax cap, so that's at 3.19%. The pilots, I had mentioned previously that we're looking at a $300,000 decrease. So that is reflected there. State aid, which we're going to get into a little bit further, which includes foundation aid and all of our expense-based aids, is only increasing by about $600,000. So that's what's comprising of the 2.2 million. And then we have our fund balance and reserve plan that we're talking about in there, and getting to our total budget of 118.6 million. You can see right now that we have that budget gap of 6.5 million. So state aid, foundation aid, it's at the executive budget's proposal, plus a couple of adjustments that we had as a result of the February database. You know, the one house budgets just came out this week and they're supporting the governor's changes in that. But it is important to note, there's just a little footnote on the side, just so everyone knows what the current law is and what that foundation aid would look like. It's about $600,000 less. But based on the conversations we're hearing, you know, it sounds like there's progress towards what we're seeing. Now, expense-based aids. So they're really based on what we're spending this year. Okay. And one of the first items, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. Building aid is a little bit different. That's based on our completed projects, what we've submitted final cost reports. That aid ratio is about 72.1%. There is a decrease in that building aid. But if you look at our line item budget, you're also going to see a corresponding decrease in our debt service. So our capital project that was approved last year, you know, that was a tax neutral project. So we're structuring our debt service along with the building aid that's coming in. So it reflects a tax neutral project. Okay, so that building aid corresponding decrease, there's also a corresponding decrease on the expenditure side. So that's
Jennifer, before you proceed, I just want to add an exclamation point to what Jennifer just said. For those of people that may not have been involved in the capital project discussions last year, none of the projected increases that we're making in the operating budget for next year are related to anything to do with the capital project. The principal and interest debt service budget line that Jennifer is referring to reflects the fact that projects were retired that we've been paying for that had been previously completed, and the cost of the new projects brought onto the budget were the exact same payments. So as we're talking about some of these increases that we're concerned about for next year and closing that gap, completely unrelated to the capital project, which is funded through borrowing and bonding, as well as a capital reserve that was established and approved by the community. So none of the figures that we're talking about, other than this building aid figure and the debt service line in the budget, have anything to do with the capital project.
I got a question too, related to the capital project. So on some of our bids, we ended up substantially lower than budgeted for. How would that influence our debt service payments relative to the budget scenario? And even if, you know, but I'm just curious, like, yeah.
I would just say in general, what we're going to try to do is, if you remember, we left some things out of the project that we couldn't afford to do.
Gotcha.
But when we have that money left over as we get into phase 3 and phase 4 of the project, if we're still on the trend where we have unspent money, we'd come back to the board and identify some of the scope that we weren't able to do, and try to spend that money that we were up to its full authorization.
Yeah, the other component is that's a really good thing to happen in our very first bid openings for this project. You
Yeah.
know, we have some very big items
Yeah,
like air
yeah.
conditioning,
Yeah.
which
Have a
means breaking into walls.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't know everything
for
that's
sure, for
there.
sure.
So
Yeah.
this is a good time to have some of those savings because,
Yeah.
you know, again, it's a capital project, it's a budget, they're estimates, it's a
I
long-term
get what
look,
you're saying.
doing the best with estimates. But once you get into the walls and find some things, there could be some additional costs that weren't anticipated too. So
I'm also wondering, like, do it impact our debt service payment?
ultimately, if we do not spend all the way up to the authorization, it could, yes.
Okay.
Obviously, there wouldn't be building aid that comes in, you know, related to that. So, you know, the building aid is about 72.1% today of our costs. So, you know, it depends on, you know, what is that net impact.
Yep, I got you.
It's not dollar for dollar.
Yeah, like
is
28
mine.
cents on the dollar savings. I got you. Yep.
Oh, just a couple. So we have our other expense base aids. So these were reviewed against our current expenditures. BOCES aid is pretty steady. Public and private excess cost aid. So this was reviewed further. We don't have many changes in the FTEs that are being supported here. However, some of the students didn't have the same kind of high cost that they did in the prior year. So there's just less cost that is needing to be aided. So just the needs of those students had changed a bit.
Instructional materials aid is generally textbook aid, software aid that is overseen by Mr. Stiles' office. So when we do our textbook replacement through a program review or recommendation that comes from a summer curriculum project, we try to spend those monies. We try to spend all of those monies because they're state categorical aid and it drives the funding for the following year.
Okay, I can take this one. All right. So this slide is just representing where the spending plan, how the spending plan is being spent. Salaries encompass about 57.9% or 48% of the budget. Employee benefits is another 34.5 million, which is about 30%. So salaries and benefits together are about $92.4 million or about 78% of the total budget. Then we have other items like equipment and contractual expenses at about 11.7, which is just under 10% of the total budget. Expenditures through BOCES, which there's BOCES aid that comes in with that on the revenue side, is about 7.8 million or 6.6% of the total budget. And then our debt service is 6.3 million or about 5% of the budget. And then there's about $400,000 in some interfund transfers.
One thing I wanted to comment on, I want to talk a little bit about salaries and BOCES. The increase in the salaries that are projected in the budget fall across all employee groups. So it includes individual contract employees, it includes the teachers, it includes the administrators, it includes the non-instructional units. And if you recall, over the last couple of years, as we've negotiated new contracts, that budget estimate is pretty in line with those settlements on average. And in addition, to go back to Mr. Buno's question, it doesn't factor in the fact that we have outgoing people with higher salaries, that if we determine to replace those folks, they'll be coming in with a new lower salary. The thing you have to remember, though, when we get to the benefits, for every person that retires, you're getting an additional and a replacement, you're getting an additional health plan that you pay for. So if somebody goes out and you replace them, we're paying for their health insurance in retirement, which is a contractual obligation, and we're paying for the new person's health insurance. So it's not just the breakage in the salary that you have to consider. You have to consider you're now paying for 2 health insurance plans for each person that retires who is replaced.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I want to say about BOCES, we are a large participant in Questar BOCES. We have a great partnership with Questar BOCES. We have the most kids that are participating in CTE programs, including when you add Tech Valley High School and you add the STEM high school. Right now, as it stands, before we consider any potential changes or reductions, my goal is to try to keep the same number of students next year in those programs, but not to add any. So in other words, if you count the number of seniors that are graduating and going out, the number of ninth graders that would go into that program would be about the same. I haven't made that final determination yet, but that's my goal, to try to maintain our participation level, but not increase our participation level.
I have a question. And I know that this broad picture is kind of like to provide us like a base level of information to build on. I'm just wondering if it's possible looking forward, when it's decision time, to kind of break out some of the non-change, like the things that we can't impact components, like teacher salaries and
Absolutely.
benefits, and just focus in on what's completely actionable. Like Mr. Buno was talking about, like the how we budget, the tax revenue figures. Like, I'm just wondering.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We were planning to give you a lot more detail.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about what we're planning and ask the board to give us other questions, information that you want us to bring to the next meeting at the end of the presentation. But that would be a great,
Excellent.
great thing to provide. So our major expenditure drivers moving forward, what are the categories of the budget that are going up the most next year? Okay. The board is aware we made a concerted effort over the last few years to ensure that our budget was not reliant on the federal COVID-related grants. And we had conversations when we added positions in those grants that we would slowly wean them off of the budget as the kids started to do better. We did that with, for example, our intervention specialists. We started with 10 and we went down to maybe 2. We added 1 in the general fund budget one year as an AAS person, but they filled positions that were vacated by retirement. The only expense that was remaining in COVID grants that we have put in the general fund is the summer school program. And it's a lesser summer school program than it's about the same as we had last year, I think. But that's something that we have to talk about. It's estimated at $82,000. So there was a slight cost shift into the general fund. Contractual salary increases about 4.5%, $2.6 million. Employee benefits. These are categories such as teacher retirement system, employee retirement system. The teacher retirement system represents school teachers and administrators. We make payments into the teacher's retirement system based on a percentage that is set by the state that is applied to the overall total budget for those salaries. So the teachers, administrators' salaries times a formula. The same with ERS for our non-instructional employees. That's what we mean by ERS and TRS and retirement payments. We pay into the system on an annual basis in our general fund budget. Health insurance is going up more than it has since my time here. We have 2 major health insurance plans that we offer our employees to choose from. They're both PPO plans or PPO related plans. And we have a prescription drug benefit plan. The cost of health insurance overall is going up $3.5 million. And that's an average across those 2 plans and prescription at 19.1%. The big driver of that is the prescription plan that is going up approximately 32%.
Yeah, about 32%.
32%. And that is the case for us and other districts related to the cost of specialized drugs that are increasing significantly, where you have a situation where these prescriptions are needed, they're used by employees, they're very expensive, and the health insurance plan pays for that expense, and we cover about 80% on average of health insurance costs for our employees. It ranges by bargaining unit. So that's a big driver.
The health insurance, is that, you talked about the retirees, is that post-employment benefits in that number as well? Is it only actives?
It's active and
Retirees.
retirees.
That's a good question.
So we're having conversations in the consortium and among superintendents about what we can do, and with our unions about what we can do to slow the growth and the cost of those categories of prescription drugs. NICET has facilitated the development of an MOU for the East Greenbush Teachers Association and our SRP group, as well as other bargaining groups that are part of CASHIC, to put in some additional cost savings measures, including utilizing more prior approvals, pre-authorization steps to be able to utilize those medications, and as well as a program called
Free market health.
Free Market Health, which negotiates more competitive costs among the pharmacies for that particular category, actually all drugs, but in particular focusing on that particular category of drugs.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's lots of conversations, and I asked that to be put on the agenda of the suburban council meeting on Friday with the superintendents, because I don't know if there's any efforts that we can make beyond what's already happening to make that go down, but it's a big concern. 19.1%. And that really doesn't have anything to do with the current contracts themselves. It just has to do with the trend that we're seeing in drug utilization.
Yeah, exactly.
BOCES includes our student programs, administrative, capital, special education, and current technical education. We pay for students that go to charter schools who are resident students, approximately $140,000. And I'll let Jen talk about general liability insurance, because this is another piece of bad news that I got within the last couple of days.
Yeah, I originally had about a 15% increase included in the budget based on some very preliminary information. And late last week, our district, along with many other districts within the Capital District, received information that the insurance, some of our districts are going up 28%. We're at about 23%. Budget to budget, it works out to be about 19. The other thing that's happening is deductibles are increasing. So for example, on the property, right now our property deductible is $5,000 and it's going up to $50,000. So there is a lot going on in the insurance market. We're actually going to be putting in a new application to a new player in town. We're going to be looking at that, whether it sharpens our current provider's pencil or it verifies that information, or maybe there's an opportunity. We're going to be looking at that because that was not a great phone call I had Friday morning.
Is that all for Utica?
Yes.
There are generally two major,
Yep.
and nicer is the other one. And
Mhm.
my anecdotal information I have is just as bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, think about just, what's happening throughout the country with insurance and claims, and the reinsurance market is, there's just a lot of pressure going on there with claim costs.
So our major expense categories are listed here and amounts to about $7.2 million.
Yes. And that's an important point. So so we've identified all of those major drivers plus some, so the next slide, actually, there's an increase of $6.9 million in the budget. So all those other things that we were talking to are amounting to about $7.2 million. There's some other cost increases as well. So we've already made some adjustments to bring that down, just realigning some things that may have been, okay, those budget estimates were probably a little bit higher. So let's just adjust those to make them more realistic and still, so there was some adjustments on that. So here's just a chart. We've talked a lot about what those cost drivers are. It's a little bit easier to see, on paper, how that breaks down and where it increases in those percentages and how we get to that $6.9 million increase, which is about a 6.2% increase. And that overall increase is in employee benefits. It's about $4 million, and that accounts for over 58% of the total increase that's projected for next year's budget. So that's obviously the major player. So just going back and focusing a little bit more, obviously we have the salary line because we always look at those in conjunction with the employee benefits as well. But breaking down the employee benefits, so you can see where the types of employee benefits that the district pays for. We have health insurance, we have dental and vision insurance, we have retirement contributions to the employees' retirement system and the teachers' retirement system. We have our mandated Social Security and Medicare FICA taxes, workers' compensation claims, 403B non-elective payments, which some of our bargaining groups, as part of their retirement incentive payments based on accrued leave, is paid through a 403B non-elective. So that's those estimated budgets. So some of those aren't changing much. It's really in the health insurance.
So so this piece that you're talking about, this is the increases over last year. And last year, we also had a structural deficit. So we have to add on top of what we're carrying forward as a deficit. Is that correct?
Right. So,
Okay.
so the difference between budgeted revenues and expenditures last year was
Yeah.
about $7.3 million.
Yeah.
This year it's 12, which is an increase of $4.7 million, which is the difference between budgeted revenues and budgeted expenditures for 25-26. So
So,
it's increasing by $4.7 million.
So you're showing us the change year to year plus the carry. So you're right now, I'm just saying, like, you're describing the change year to year from increase. And there's also structural. Is that?
When you say
Yeah.
last year, I think you're referring to the budget that was presented last year, which is this year. So it's this year to next
Gotcha,
year.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Correct?
So, right. Yeah. So that's why we're in.
I got you.
I know we talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I
I
hear
feel
what
like
you're
I'm in
saying.
3
Right,
fiscal
right,
years
right,
all
right,
at the
I got
same
you.
time,
I
but
got you.
What I'm looking at here
Yeah.
is basically.
Yeah.
This portion here is with that $12 million, doubling from the previous year. Unfortunately, it's due to a lot of benefit costs.
Yeah,
I think.
It's the major driver.
yeah, definitely.
So when we say like on average in the past, expenses went up like 3%, and now we're looking at about 6%, and we're gonna carve it back down. Where do we?
Actually, I would say the budget went up. The expenses went up by more than that,
Yes.
but we were able to absorb it in the budget
yes.
because
So
we had
yep.
Yeah.
more surplus built in.
yeah. So like going back to that graphic, the blue, red, and green, slide, you'll see that the difference between the expenditures, that red line and that blue line was much greater.
Right.
And over time, it's done this. So, right, on average, budget increases 3%. That's not necessarily what expenditures did.
And that was my concern with that 23-24 is that red line was like this.
Yeah.
Inflation, a lot of things, a lot of factors there.
Sure.
that
Right.
we can anticipate.
Further breaking down the health insurance too, again, just the point that when I talked about averaging across the plans and the pharmacy, the 32.8% in the pharmacy increase.
Yeah, so this slide takes our health insurance and breaks it down between medical and pharmacy. And then it just shows the plans down below and what those actual premium increases were from year to year. So we have the Highmark PPO plan, which last year was a 9% increase. And this year it's just about another 9% increase. Okay, so we're not talking about change between years. We're talking about last year, there was an additional 9%. This year, there's another additional 9%. The CDPHP plan is an HMO plan, so that's community rated. That is seeing significant increases this year. So that's a community rated plan, which is different than the PPO plan, which is basically a retrospective rated plan and is considering the CASHIC group consortium experience versus the HMO, which is more of a community rated plan. And then the pharmacy benefit manager is Express Scripts. Last year we had a 15% increase.
Could you explain that a little bit further? Because to me, what I'm hearing is like we're paying for others' expenses in a larger pool. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
So there's a couple things
Yeah.
that we want to look at in
Yeah.
relation to that because
Yeah.
there is a CDPHP PPO plan. So there
Yeah.
are some things that, we can take a look at to see if there's some different structures there.
But with the
But-
prescription, I wondered the same question a couple years ago. We are self-funded for the prescription. So our increases are based on our utilization.
Yeah.
And right? And
Yes.
the data that if anybody is interested, the data that we shared in the minutes of the board meeting where we reported on the health insurance committee shows a lot of information regarding the trends where you have a small number of individuals utilizing
Yes.
very
Yes,
expensive
definitely. Yeah.
medications that amount to almost half of
Yeah.
the increases. And the other thing that points out is in this current year, what we budgeted for this current year in the prescription plan ran a deficit. And within the structure of the health insurance program, we have to do a transfer. Is that correct?
Yeah. So part of how
So we're
yeah.
under budget this year
Right.
with the prescription. component as well.
Right. So, yeah, so for,
And I
go
just want
ahead.
to say because my question, I think, was specific to the Medicare Advantage plan. And I just because it's
Okay.
and I'm wondering if we were saying that there's a larger pool outside of our utilization that's a part of that program.
Well, yeah, the CDPHP HMO is community rated.
Yes.
So that is a large.
So we're kind of absorbing others' utilization, possibly if our utilization reflects
It's
differently.
all based on the
Oh.
community's experience,
Okay.
Not the
Yes, that's
Medicare
Everybody
Advantage
is.
plan.
but not and the Medicare
That's not
Advantage
the
is,
Medicare Advantage, that's your HMO.
yeah,
You know, not the 4 to 40. You see what I'm?
I'm not sure.
The second one, HMO,
Yes.
is a community rated plan.
Okay. Okay.
which,
Gotcha.
uh,
Okay. Gotcha.
Which
Thank
is,
you.
which is, the rates are set based on
Okay.
the community, not just the participants in the consortium.
Now, one thing to point out, because you did just mention the Medicare Advantage, that did have a large increase, but the Medicare Advantage premium rates are significantly lower than our commercial plans with Highmark and CDPHP. So participation in those, obviously, it's for those retirees that are over 65. So it's a matter of whether or not they end up on, because we also have a commercial Medicare plan. It's not Medicare Advantage plan, but it's a commercial Medicare plan
gotcha.
through Highmark and CDHP, which are a lot more expensive. So that's another thing.
There's no
What
expense
else
figures
can we
here. I
do?
got
Can
you.
we
It's
do
just
some more
percentages.
outreach to see,
Yeah.
if those Medicare Advantage plans happen to reach more of our retirees in a positive way? It might meet their needs. So even though that is a larger increase, which those Medicare Advantage plans they haven't had many increases at all, but there was some changes.
Medicare rating.
Yes, thank you. I was going to point to you. So there's been some changes in that market in general that has caused those steeper increases.
So it's important for any school district to be aware of issues related to ensuring that you have a sufficient fund balance. And we're more concerned about that entering into next year than we have been in years past because of some of the issues that we have been talking about. But we want to explain that we ideally want to have our revenues exceeding our expenditures and result in a surplus. And we were on a trend to do that for a while. Additionally, you want to be able to provide predictability and stability to the district. So when emergencies come up, such as Jennifer mentioned, having to replace the hot water heater system at a school, you have money available to do that maybe wasn't specifically budgeted for. Other things that happen that affect the budget for which fund balance needs to be used includes not necessarily knowing all of your staffing requirements in May. So for example, students move into the district that may need special education services. They may need a different kind of program. They may need a teaching assistant, which is determined by the Committee on Special Education. So you have to budget a little excess to be able to cover those kinds of things that may come up. You also want to have flexibility. For example, we've had some flexibility over the years to be able to look at our reserves at the end of the year and say, hey, how about we set aside some money for this purpose, whether it's increasing money in the transportation reserve that we're able to do in anticipation of having to replace buses and dealing with the EV buses that may be approaching us. And you also want to make sure that when folks look at your district, they understand that you're a stable district. And every year since I've been here and long prior, our district has received a very high rating from the New York State Comptroller regarding our bond rating. I think we have one of the top bond ratings that a school district can receive.
Yep.
Based on our fiscal stability.
Yep, our bond rating is currently a AA3, and then our short term, we have a MIG rating 1, so that's the highest for short term borrowing.
Right. So we've always engaged in long-term planning, and we will continue to do that. The components of making sure that we can use some level of reserves to close this gap in combination with expenditure reductions and taxes should be tied to a plan moving forward where you're really looking at ways to be a little bit more proactive about your district's reserve position. There's some certain variables that you simply don't control. The big health insurance spike is one of them, but there are issues that we do control, and we're taking a look at everything right now, which I'll talk about in just a little bit between now and the next meeting.
All right.
That's yours because I don't have my glasses on.
Okay, so now we're going to take a little look at, how did we develop the fund balance appropriation that is in this first initial budget rollout. So this is looking at the details of what fund balance was planned to be used to support the spending plan in 24-25. So on the portion of fund balance that's not assigned, not earmarked, there was a planned support of the spending plan of $6.6 million. Then we were going to also use the ERS reserve for $400,000, and then the EBLAR, which is the Employee Benefits Liability Reserve, which is comprised of basically our accrued leave payments, is about $280,000. So that comes to that $7.3 million that closed the gap in the 24-25 year. Now looking forward, 25-26, we projected our revenues and expenditures for 24-25, and we are planning on using $2.4 million of the unassigned fund balance, because that is our projected deficit, on top of using, and this slide doesn't depict this well, but we're also using the ERS reserve, and we're also going to be using the EBLAR reserve. So the $2.4 million plus $400,000 plus $280,000 is that just under $3.1 million operating deficit. So when we're looking at what's left, so that $4,193,000 is what is left of that 6.6 after we use it this year. Now, that will create the question of, well, then what happens in 26, 27? If we're spending more of it, and how much more of that 4.1 are we actually going to spend going into 26, 27? That's some of the details that we're going to dive into more at the next meeting. Also, just initially, this is initial rollout, we're going to look at this further, but the ERS and the EBLAR reserve, and we talked about last year starting to use the TRS reserve. So that's included in here. Basically, these increases just represent the interest earnings from those investments from 23-24 and 24-25. So I just put them in there. Okay.
You didn't touch principal or whatever.
No, well, we are, because the 400,000 is being used out of the regular reserve. But I just took the increased earnings. This is for conversation. Okay.
Yep.
So this is using more of those reserves. Now I do want to just back up if I can with so that when we're talking about the ERS, just to some conceptual things to think about, the retirement line, the total budgeted expenditures are $6.5 million. Okay. So those are reoccurring expenditures based on the salaries that we have. So obviously, if there's some reductions in salaries, then perhaps, there would be reductions in contributions for ERS and TRS. So when we're looking forward, and the ERS, I'm sorry, they're separated, EBLAR is bridging in between them, but it's about $725,000. And so we're a little over $1 million in appropriation, so we got to be careful of how we're utilizing those reserves to support reoccurring expenditures. Okay. There are reserves. We just need to be strategic on how those get spent and depleted, because if they're balancing your budget, taking away your structural budget deficit, it's equivalent to a loss in revenue. And that's the 1.7 million. So for example, the difference, remember before I said that the budget, the revenues, the expenditures were exceeding the revenues by $4.7 million. Okay. This is creating a budget gap of 6.5 because we have to reduce this.
And this is just the assigned, like there's unassigned reserves, right? And there's assigned reserves. This is just the assigned reserves.
This is just the utilization of the reserves that we can without voter approval.
Okay.
Okay. So
The ones that
we'll
we have to
we'll show what that full picture is.
Yeah,
I think that's on another slide.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, okay. So we did take it a step further, looking at what our total fund balances. Oh, so
A
this
global
leads
picture.
right into your
Right,
question,
global
Jesse.
picture,
Sorry, I
yeah.
forget what slides I have in here sometimes. So our total assigned and unassigned fund balance, which is our like non-reserved, our non-earmarked fund balance at the end of last fiscal year, June 30th, 2024, was 11.8 million. So when we apply that projected deficit of 2.4 million, that brings that number down to 9.4. Okay. Then we have, if what our deficit is being projected going into the following year is 7.2 million, that's only leaving another $2.1 million left. So you can see that it can be depleted very quickly,
So-
based on that current spending plan, if we have that and actually spend up to those
So
expenses.
the presentation is showing us the change in the balance, and the increase decrease figure is our utilization.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. And then just below that darker line is just showing the breakdown of what that for 24-25, that 9.4 million is comprised of. So there was some carryover encumbrances. We have those every year. It's basically commitments of purchases that are made at the end of the year that are actually not paid for until the following year, or services not delivered till next year. That 4.2 million in assigned fund balance is what is being used to support next year's budget. And then that leaves a remaining unassigned fund balance. And this is another piece. So in the law, it says that we're not able to maintain more than 4% of an unassigned fund balance. Okay. So if we had spent 7.3 million going into 25-26, that would bring our unassigned fund balance down to $1.4 million, which is only 1.25% of this year's budget, not even looking at the next year's budget, because that 4% is always measured on your ensuing year budget. So this can be depleted. You can just see how quickly, this could be depleted if, the right plans aren't put into place.
Is the goal to stay at 4%?
That's basically kind of our emergency funds. So, I mean, if you think about it with cash flow, even just basic cash flow, property taxes, the warrants get issued in mid-September, right? Our collections happen in October. So if you just think of the cash, we do get state aid that comes in all across the year. But I don't know, probably in the private sector, they probably look to have at least 2 or 3 months, of cash on hand. Yeah, basically to be able to pay for expenses, and 4% doesn't quite.
One of the things that we have advocated for as
That's
superintendents over the years is to raise, not that we're in a position to do that now, but to raise that cap. The state, I think, keeps 15% in reserves. And ours has been 4. And when I started as a superintendent, it was 2.
I was hearing rumors of penalizing school districts for having above the cap.
That was part of the foundation aid study.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's never really happened. Sometimes you get a letter.
And just to be clear too, we've been above the cap.
Yes.
Yes.
We
Mhm.
consciously chose that during COVID to
Yes.
I think it's 6 or 7% level
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, so
to
we
protect
have,
ourselves.
we haven't
But we moved
used,
that out.
we haven't used the reserves in this,
We
No.
already touched it.
right, just now.
Yep.
This current budget, we started applying the reserves and trying to match that up with expenses.
Otherwise it was never, it was.
Well, we were able to
Outside of
increase
you.
them.
We were able to, fund them.
Yeah, no, when did we actually have to break into them last time? Do we know?
I
that-
think there was, I'm sorry.
Not in my, not,
Before this time.
Maybe the transportation emergency project. I think there was a strategy, not digging too deep into the details, but what I was seeing is that we may have used some retirement reserve money to help free up that money to help fund that transportation emergency project, which was well over $1 million. So that's another example of having emergency funds.
you're still on this
Yep,
one?
yep. So this is a complete fund balance and reserve picture. These are the ending balances. The very first column is the actual ending balances of all the reserves and fund balance as of June 30th, 2024. Applying our projected year-end results in the middle column to what those balances would look like in 24-25. And then bringing them even a step further into 25-26 based on this roll forward budget and projecting out those expenses based on this year's projection. So I just want to point out there's a couple of things. There's a middle category here. There's a subtotal operating reserves here. And then we have these non-operating reserves. So this is capital project, bus purchases, and tax surcharge. We can't really touch these in terms of for a regular operating. And then we have our assigned and unassigned. And here's that 4% concept. So even though fund balance at the end of 23-24 was $31.6 million, it's the 14 and the 11 that we're looking at right now. Okay. And then in 24-25, we're decreasing 14 to 9 and then 13 to 2. So we're going to be talking about some of this stuff on the upper side. But we'll have to be careful on how we do that. Because if that $12 million budget gap, you can see at the end of 25-26, there's 18 million, it can be depleted quickly.
Another thing I would point out, and I don't know the rules off the top of my head, but there are certain reserves that the board has the authority to appropriate from. There are other reserves that require the board to get community approval, like the transportation reserve. So if you are in a position where you want to utilize some of these reserves to cover operating expenses, there are rules involved in how you do that. And in some cases, you can't do that.
So we did that with which reserves? The TRS?
In terms of the appropriation of them. So this year it's ERS and
Yes.
EBLAR. And then next year it's ERS, TRS, and EBLAR.
And which one has there's a percentage that you can only have for one of the retirement reserves, right? There was a,
Yeah, so the TRS retirement reserve is not fully funded up to the cap
right.
in the law.
ERS has no cap.
ERS has no cap, but we
Right.
kind of, so obviously our ERS,
Okay,
so the predominant salary budget, right? Most of our staff are instructional staff, right? That's our business. That's what we do. So you can see, so obviously our TRS expenses are going to be more than our ERS expenses. But the the ERS reserve is larger. Now because there's no cap, right? So you're able to fund it more. And that's what had happened in the past. Right. So it's a matter of deciding what is an appropriate level of reserves. We're also talking about, the general liability insurance, the deductibles going up. Now, if we have an issue, we have issues every year. 5,000 isn't much to deal with those issues. But if deductibles are going to be at that level, there's an insurance reserve that maybe we should have. Okay.
But when you think about what level of appropriating reserves you want to make, you have to think about doing that in combination with actual expense reductions and tax increases. Because if you don't do that, you can blow through this money very quickly. So if you're offsetting salary increases and benefit increases, to the projections that we're showing here by simply putting the reserves in, that money will be gone in 2 years. So you just have to be cautious. We need to use the reserves, but we also, during the next year and the following years, we need to be strategic about expenditure reductions, and we can't ignore the idea that we've got some tough issues that we have to deal with, and we've been good with the tax levy. We've been very good with the tax levy. But entering into this scenario, you've got to raise the taxes as you are doing these things. And one of the things I'll say repeatedly as we talk about the budget, when you're starting to move into a structural deficit and begin thinking about utilizing reserves, you want to get back to a position where you have that surplus and that flexibility and that ability to be able to plan long range. And you can get back there. You just have to be cautious and careful about not trying to fix the problem in 1 year. Okay. And again, I'll go back. There were good reasons to do the things that were done, but they cost us more, and there was a loss of revenue. But I think now we're in a position where we need to reevaluate our program to be able to adjust to the fact that our expenditures are exceeding our revenues, and we can't simply fill the hole with our reserves, because then the hole gets bigger.
So we need to
The
change
gap
things.
is bigger, and the tax levy increases.
I'd add a fourth thing to that, Jeff, because I think cost containment regarding the health insurance to the consortium is got to be a priority. I mean, the superintendents, along with the bargaining units at a state level, whatever level, regional level, have to address the fact that there's got to be more competitiveness in the market. Right. to provide the level of benefits we want to for our staff, which is important.
Yeah.
But it has to be at a reasonable price where we're not passing all these costs on to the school district. I think sometimes these insurance companies just pass these
Well,
things
you wind
on
up
and
cutting
they're gonna
teachers
just
for
continue to.
prescriptions. That's what you wind up doing, microphone. As
No.
well. Yeah, 19%
I
increase
mean,
in prescription costs, and you wind up having to reduce your staff because you
yeah,
can't cover
because
that
you
difference.
want to pay, you want to provide the best benefits you can for your employees. And I think that taking a holistic approach, I mean, the suburban council group probably collectively is in the hundreds of millions of dollars in business for
Right.
I work.
Right.
And then even if you include this side of the river with all the
Yep.
districts,
Of the-
it could be
of
$1
the-
billion in health
Mhm.
insurance.
100% correct. In fact, what you're saying was the reason I was up at 2 a.m. last night, trying to think about what we could possibly do about this. And I sent an email to the suburban council. Not all, the CASHIC is made up of suburban council superintendents, so we're not in it. There's about 9 superintendents that I emailed this morning. And I said, we got to talk about this again. This is just,
And
this is just out of,
And New York State has the Empire Plan, right?
Right.
And then there's
Yeah.
state employees.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, so we have a separate plan from the state and, you know,
Right.
are they seeing the same kind of increases?
Everybody's saying.
Everybody
Yeah, for sure.
is.
Yeah,
It's
100%.
But together,
nationwide.
we have to be able to
Yeah.
address
Right.
this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cost containment.
Yeah.
It really, it is too. You know, unfortunately,
It's strains lower
you
budgets.
often have to put a little guardrails around prescription.
Right.
It is, otherwise you're not gonna be able to afford anything.
Right.
It's, hopefully you still do and fit everybody's needs, but you put some guardrails around it.
So one of the things I would say internally is our bargaining units are very aware of what's happening in this and have been very
Very well.
cooperative. And we have this health insurance committee that we created my first year that has been good information sharing. So they're aligned by this as well because they're paying the increases too.
Yeah, it
Right.
impacts them.
It does, it goes through to them. Yeah.
Their increases in their contract are wiped out by health insurance costs.
Right.
So,
It's a shame.
Jen,
Just one, oh, yes, Jen.
I just want to ask one question. So you talked about the 300,000 reduction in pilot, right?
Mhm.
So when that's reduced, presumably these entities are now going on the tax rolls, correct?
Yes.
Do we
perhaps.
Maybe.
anticipate,
There's one. that's
Yeah.
not.
Or they fight their assessment.
in theory, so do we anticipate the tax revenue to balance that out, or would they be paying significantly less in tax revenue?
So when they come on the tax rolls, that means that there would be additional assessed value. A couple of the pilots that are coming, they're not necessarily coming off, their agreements have expired. So there's no concrete knowledge, and one of them is a nonprofit. So, which has a pilot. So depending on what happens with those situations, maybe that number ends up being conservative, but there's information right now that those agreements have expired and we don't have any concrete information as to whether or not they're going to be renewed. So theoretically, yes, normally like 1 year, actually that was the reason for a pretty significant tax cap in 22-23, I think it was 4.96%. And that was because the FedEx Scannell properties, that pilot expired and came on the tax roll. So that tax-based growth factor that's in the tax cap calculation was a lot higher than normal. So that gave additional levying power, which was up 4.96%. But because of other circumstances, the levy ended up being 0 that year.
There have been state proposals to include pilots revenues in the overall calculation of the tax cap in terms of not having to exclude them.
Right.
And they haven't gotten any
Correct.
support.
Can I make a segue to something else real quick?
Sure.
I think if the students want to leave.
Oh.
Okay.
For the last slide, which.
I thought they were, I thought, you were just being
There's-
polite, Mr. Buno. I thought they were captivated by our riveting budget
They were
presentation.
not sleeping.
If you guys care to leave, that would be fine. Those of you who want to learn more about budgeting for school districts, hang out.
Yeah, we got some derivatives. up
Yes, okay. That was a good call, Mr. Bruno.
Thank you.
Oh,
There's one more point I need.
okay, and this one, okay. All right. All right.
They've been.
there.
I was just gonna miss the best part of the show.
Really? Are you gonna say kidding?
No, I'm not gonna say that.
Well,
It's probably the best part.
All right. All right. All right.
Okay.
Nice drive. Work City.
Sorry about that.
You didn't say and Mark.
So there's just one more point that I want to just make on this slide, and it's the bus purchase reserve. So on average, the net cost of the buses after aid is about $500,000 or so. So if you look at that bus purchase reserve, you can see it going down by about $500,000 each year, which means at the end of 25, 26, after we buy those and spend the money on buses next year, there's about 2 years or so left in that reserve. And we're in a position of not being able to fund those reserves. So that means to maintain our fleet and to continue our regular replacement, which is going to be prudent,
It'll be our
because of the
operation
size of our fleet, we're going to be financing those buses.
And in my time here, there were a couple years initially where we had some buses being funded out of the reserve and some that we were borrowing for. And I think that's where we're headed.
Yes. So just wanted to bring that out.
Oh, that's a good point. So where do we go from here? We want to take any questions or requests for information that the board may have between now and our next meeting. We're going to continue to advocate for state aid. As Jennifer said, the two, and Jesse let me know yesterday that the two Assembly and Senate one-house buses budget proposals came out. There's some things in there that we asked for. Thank you for the advocacy committee as well. Samantha and Kim and Dan and Jen and me, along with some others. It's 3 high school students joined us on Friday. It was nice to see that the Senate included the waiver of the retirement earnings cap for 2 years. Assembly did not include it. Both houses included the foundation aid formula changes that benefit East Greenbush School District. There was an increase that we've been asking for at least 20 years, I think, in the BOCES salary cap. It's going to gradually go up if it goes through. I believe that was in the Senate. In both houses. And for the first time that I have seen, and the reimbursement for UPK amount. One of the houses had $10,000 per student. The other had
Seven.
So
7,000
that's
change.
not been in there ever. So that's a good sign, I think. So that will save the general fund.
Yes.
What I would recommend is you take that full amount if it's increased and you try to cover your general fund that you're utilizing right now to pay for that, right? Or as much as you can of your general fund.
Great.
So we're going to continue to advocate till the state budget is. We have to make reductions in expenditures, and we will bring you a list of considerations that we're making. We don't have that list. It will involve, I don't want to mislead anybody, it will involve a review of all current vacant positions that either being vacated by attrition, both instructional and non-instructional, or have been vacated during the course of the year now that we haven't filled. I'd rather, if I have to, recommend that we reduce positions with attrition rather than laying people off. I don't know that that's possible. I just don't know. I'm not saying it will be or it won't be. I just don't know at this point. Our administrative team has been meeting. I'll be talking with some principals, department chairs, and some other things about the scope of the issues and see if we can't come to you with a list of recommendations of expenditure reductions that will close that budget gap at the next meeting. We're going to have a conversation about how we utilize our fund balance and reserves at our next meeting. Jennifer will bring more information about her thinking on that. Again, I've said this in the past. It's kind of a mantra of superintendents. Be careful about utilizing one-shot revenues to pay for recurring expenses. So if you get a grant of some kind, or you get money from, you want to buy equipment, that makes more sense than paying for staff where those salaries and benefits are going to go up every year. We've been pretty good about that. And we want to talk about the tax levy increase. This current proposal that we put forward to you goes right up to the cap. So those are our next steps. I'll take any questions or concerns or information that you would like to see at the next meeting. Just a second. I just want to propose something. I know that the board has many commitments going on right now, including 2 meetings Monday and Tuesday, right? So I was originally thinking that we would, because we had this in our budget calendar, but that would be 3 nights in a row for you. And I would honestly need more time with our administrators to put together our recommendations. So our thinking, if the board is agreeable, you have till April 22nd. So, and you have an April 8th board meeting. So our thinking was this is budget workshop number 1. This would be budget workshop number 2. This would be budget workshop number 3. And then you would adopt the budget to go out to the community on April 22nd. Does that work for everybody?
So the end of March is going to be super busy too, right? I just want to keep the board in mind, because I think we're talking about between next week and then 2 weeks from next week, because we have board meetings in between anyway. And I think we're having an extra board meeting. I hear what you're saying.
These are all
about prep
regular
time.
board meeting dates. These are all
Okay.
on the board calendar already. There's not an additional date. We're knocking off the additional date. We were hoping, but again, with what we're looking at, we were hoping that the board might be able to adopt the budget on the 8th,
Yes.
but we're going to push that back to the 22nd
Gotcha.
so that we can have one more discussion,
Okay.
one more weighing of all the issues involved on the 8th, and then adopt on the 22nd to hash everything out.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I am curious if we could round robin how everyone's feeling about the budget picture. If we just have any thoughts, don't feel put on the spot if you don't have nothing to say, but
I mean, I can certainly speak up.
Yeah.
I think it is a combination of the three things that Jeff mentioned. I think, I think I said this before, that I think we have to go to the tax cap. I think we have to make sure that we are cognizant of whatever we can do through attrition and, minimize impact on staff, but we also have to think about other areas where we need not to afford some things that we have to pass. Because it is a rollover proposal. It means everything that was in there was in there before. Things can go. It doesn't mean it's going to be something that's staff related. And then I think that one thing I'd like to see on top of that is I'd like to see, is there anything we can do to bring that 24-25 expenditure number in terms of any cost measures we can do this year that we can kick out and maybe postpone? If there's anything that we can do, not buy, just even if it's small items. I think every dollar is important. March, April, May, and June, if there's ways we can reduce expenditures for the remainder of the year in some way to help support and that reduce that or increase that.
Right.
Yeah.
In light of that, Mike, I've talked to Jen, and I haven't announced this yet or even made a decision yet. I've had in situations like this in the past where we want to try to end up the year better than what we're projecting right now. We do like a soft freeze, supplies, materials, equipment, and of course, anybody that needed anything that was essential. But we'd cut off the budget. You put in extra approvals to ask. I certainly we would go forward with all the end of the year activities and the field trips and the things that the students and the staff look forward to. But my position on this kind of thing is, well, if you haven't spent it by March or April, unless it's something that supports a spring specific activity, we don't need it. Let's put it in the savings.
And I do think fund balance, we've had very, very healthy fund balances for many, many years. I think it's a great day.
Right.
a question.
Raining.
It's raining.
To close the gap strictly through tax increases, what does that increase look like?
It depends on whether you're talking about the gap between what we've already appropriated reserves and the overall budget, which is the $12 million, or you're taking those reserves out.
Give
It's
me both figures.
double digit.
Yeah.
It's probably 23.5%.
Okay. So,
That's what the gap between the rollover budget and
No reserve.
the current tax levy is with no appropriation of reserves and fund balance. Is that correct?
okay,
Right.
okay. And
That's untenable.
okay. Okay.
And what if we bring in some of the reserves? You have that one?
I think that, well, with the reserves that are in there right now, it's still 18.
So 1% is about $600,000. 1% increase in tax.
Okay.
There's no fiscally responsible way to avoid cuts.
So, I mean, I have a question. I mean, more of a comment.
All right.
And I hear what you're saying, right? Like, I think, I hear what you're saying, right? We have to look at the full picture. What are we spending? What are we bringing in? How are we budgeting? I like directionally. I like the direction, Mr. Buno. And however, looking at the full picture, right? Like we have to get in a position if we're looking at a 23% tax increase, just strictly with things rolling over, right? Like it has to be a very hard look at everything.
Right.
And I think we have to prioritize, right, protecting our district as far
Right.
as is practical for
Right.
the circumstances, right? And
I
yeah,
think you're 100% correct there. I mean, as I started the presentation and saying that we have made great progress as a school district. We've always been a strong school district, and in the last few years, we've really made great progress. With enough effort and enough taking a look at things, we can continue to offer the same programs that we offer now.
Yeah.
I won't mislead anybody that those programs may have to be delivered more efficiently with fewer staff. I've
So-
never been a fan
Yeah.
of taking a whole program and reducing it, like athletics. You know, you see when times get tough, people remove athletics. You hurt a lot of kids for a few dollars.
Yeah.
But when you take a more of a precision look at, you know, where your enrollment has gone over the last 5 years, what were the reasons why you kept positions? I remember, and I've been talking about this, and those are, I remember presenting the budget at Belltop a few years ago, and I said, we're keeping our class sizes at the elementary school level lower than we need to based on the contract, because we still have kids recovering from COVID. And I'm not suggesting that those needs are completely addressed, but we're doing that analysis. We're looking back 5 years and saying, well, how many staff, we're doing this staff report that Samantha's been bringing up, high level look at the staff. Where were we 5 years ago? Where are we now compared to enrollment? We're looking at the impact if we were to not replace positions, what the impact might be on elementary, middle, and high school. So we're not just looking at costs, we're looking at impact and benefit.
we have to.
And we'll explain some of those things at the next meeting. So right now, for example, you may have flexibility in the high school schedule to be able to meet every request. You may not be able to meet every request because you may have to make some choices about number. And I said this last year, the number of kids that are in certain classes. It depends on the class. If a student is on a pathway, for example, and they're a junior or a senior, and they counted on meeting a certain pathway, such as, some college credit courses that we want to try to preserve that. But if we also have to take into account the number of teachers that we need for the required Regents courses, the 9th grade and the 10th grade, 11th grade. So we're not just looking at chopping expenditures. We're looking at, if we do X, what's the impact? But I don't want to suggest that there won't be an impact. There is going to be an impact.
I do want to say like one more
But we've
thing.
been very good
Yeah.
about adjusting our staffing when necessary, both adjusting it up when the support was needed and adjusting it down when the resources aren't there.
So
Resources aren't there.
So at the 23% number, you said 600,000 per percent. So at the tax cap, we're talking about roughly $2 million of the 12 million deficit, $10 million left over at the cap. So
It's about you're going to yield about $1.8 million.
I was trying not to be too precise.
Right.
Yes.
So the 12 million is after the realization of the tax levy.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Got you. Got you. Got you. Okay. 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 Got you. So don't bring it down. None.
No,
Okay.
not at the cap.
Yeah.
More than that, it would.
But just to say, so that's what we're trying to close. There's no way to get there without a comprehensive approach. And I just want to say, for me, the challenge is we're looking at 1 year in a vacuum, right? Like right now, we're only talking about next year. However, we don't know in the picture, like what if, right? The picture continues to become, right, rising expenses, right? With strained revenues when we're so far apart. And my question is, how do we get on a track, right, that we're no longer so spread apart, right, to reface decision year after year that's going to be challenging,
So a couple of things. One is, you continue to advocate that, increases in state aid are necessary because the needs of the students have increased. And you try to advocate for those factors in the formula that will help a district like East Greenbush. you also have to be mindful that the formula includes what the state feels the local taxpayers should pay. So we have to talk about that. The other thing that Jennifer mentioned was if you adjust your staffing down, okay, that not only saves you the salary, it saves you the health insurance, it saves you the PTRS and the ERS payments. It has a ripple effect in those other areas of the budget.
Yeah.
So you want to do that. Okay. You've got to do this a couple years in a row to get back to where you want to get. The expenses are going to go up.
They definitely are.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you know, again, one of our challenges, our enrollment is stable and increasing slightly. Okay. And you're going to, so when you think about certain types of reductions, you just can't do them. You know, I've been analyzing different things and you look at it and say, okay, well, what would that class size look like if I pull one teacher out of that? Well, I can't do it. Oh, here I could do it. And then you look at equity across the whole district in terms of trying to be considerate of the students' needs, which are different.
Yeah.
At different levels and in different buildings. And then you have to look at what's the overall impact district-wide. You know, and sometimes not everybody always understands that, but when you're in a situation like this, you try to do what's in the best interest of the district and try to preserve the programs that the students need. And even if those programs are going to be a little bit more efficient in terms of how you're utilizing your staff, you can't just look at you try to look at the areas away from the classroom first. Okay, so I'm looking at operations and maintenance. I'm not saying I'm making specific position reductions yet, but you might hear some things now about I've made a decision not to replace a van driver that delivers stuff around the schools. I floated the idea by Paul and Wanda, you know, why don't we have a bus driver do it for a couple extra hours a day? And that doesn't cost you the benefits that would be in place. So we're looking at a different way to do that.
Good.
And with electronic mail and everything else right now, do we really need somebody driving around all day? Okay, and delivering things. The grounds people have been picking it up, but those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at. So you've got to make position cuts. And the better way to do it is when the position is vacant. We're looking at clerical. Okay. You know, certain individuals here have indicated that, you know, we might not have to fill certain clerical positions that are vacant right now. And we're looking at those kinds of things too. Nobody likes any of that, but at the same time, again, it goes back to the principle, let's try to keep as many reductions away from the classroom as possible. But given the fact that the teacher portion of the, it's not feasible. We have maybe 9 or 10 teachers that retired. We're taking a look at what it would mean programmatically to not replace all of them. In some cases, we think we can't. And in some cases, we made commitments that we knew last year we were going to be living with a very tight situation in one department. So we might have to reduce some and add some in different areas. So those are things that we're doing, Jesse.
Okay, so you're saying
There's
that's part.
It's really just being cognizant of the fact that when 80% of your budget almost is in personnel, you cannot close that gap without personnel reductions.
So you're saying that part of the comprehensive approach, you're going to be looking at that piece, like all of the pieces that we can affect, and you're going to be bringing additional information of specifics about the mechanics of what you looked into and what you're going to propose with your experience. Okay.
I'm going to bring it at the next meeting,
Awesome.
along with the reserve
Yes.
information.
So
And all. So
I have a few questions and I don't expect an answer now. These are things I'm interested and I don't know if you're already planning on bringing them. I am interested in potentially looking at, I mean, we're talking about going to the tax cap. You know, in your experience, if we were to consider going over, what would you be looking at? Like, what do you think would work? And what would that save us
okay.
in terms of positions and
Right.
everything?
I don't know the answer to that right
Right.
now. What I would want to do is give you a combination of things.
Yes.
Like a
That's the
scenario.
approach.
Yes.
X number of cuts.
Yep.
X tax increase, X appropriation of reserves.
Yes.
Okay, like sample one,
Yes.
sample two,
Mhm.
tax levy increase. maybe something like that.
That- yeah.
This percentage over the tax levy
Mhm.
would offset these cuts
Yes.
or offset this level of reserve.
I would like to have every financial piece that we could decision on. Like, I mean, I personally wouldn't exclude the capital project, right? I wouldn't exclude the capital project. And I'm not saying in regards to making changes to it, but if it's a point of decisioning, and all I'm trying to say is it's like,
That's different money, but it's totally different money. It doesn't
it's
affect the budget.
20, it's 28 cents on the dollar savings, you said, for the amount of the operational expense for replacement. So is that accurate?
So there's
Say-
obviously going to be debt service, principal and interest related to the project.
But-
There's also building aid. Okay, so right now it's going
Are
to
we-
be
are
on an
we winning
even, so
28?
you're
If we cut
correct
$1 million,
that the net
will we
cost
save
is about.
280 grand on the operation
It-
side?
It's going to cut, if you, first of all, and this gives me an opportunity to explain for those people that might be watching, not doing the capital project won't help you at all
I'm not saying not
with
doing
this
it.
budget problem.
I'm talking about bringing everything to that as a decision point. I'm not talking about changing nothing. All I'm trying to say is I don't want to, like, for me, if we're saying pre-deciding and then focusing in the area, for me, that's like,
It doesn't, but Jesse, it doesn't have any bearing on the operating budget right now.
so what I'm trying to, but so what I'm saying is if we cut $1 million, right, from the capital project in total, that, like, let's just say like from spent today, right, of the debt that's being replaced. If $1 million wasn't being put back on the books, you're saying we
Right.
wouldn't save 280 grand.
Well, you put yourself in a position later on when you need to do that work.
I hear what you're saying.
To have that.
I'm just
that
saying it's
tax
a decision
impact.
point, and you're saying that it works better to keep it there. I understand. that.
I think always it works better.
Yeah.
To utilize a bond proposal
Yes.
proposition that has
Okay.
been approved by the
Gotcha.
voters to do your facilities and
Yeah.
maintenance repairs than it is to dip into your
Because it
operating
can end
budget.
up in the operating.
It's cheaper in the
anyways,
long
what you're
run
saying.
for our taxpayers.
Yeah.
It prevents you from getting into a situation where you have to fix a roof and you
Yeah.
don't have the money approved, so you have to dip into your operating budget.
Yeah.
It costs you a lot more in the long run
I hear what you're
to
saying.
do it that way, and I think that that's, one of the reasons why I thought the community supported it is because we have aging buildings and issues that we have to address in a building, and it won't do a thing. Yeah, it will result in you having possibly to borrow less money, but the borrowing that's associated with doing it now versus postponing it and the expense of it going up is you're really saving money for the taxpayers right now, and there's no ability to shift any of that savings right now to save any teacher positions or any programs anyway. So that's why I don't think it's something that has any bearing on the general fund budget gap that we're facing right now.
So we
Because I think it's
don't,
going to save you a lot of
I
money
hear
in
what
the
you're
long
saying,
run.
but we don't debt service out of operating. We don't service our.
Yes,
debt
we
out
do.
of- Okay.
It's principal and interest payments on the borrowing that we've done spread over 15 years.
That's all. I mean, I'm not saying that we should change anything. All I'm trying to say is it's like, I'm just asking why.
It dips down if
Yeah,
you, there's a smoothing that we
I
did
got you.
in the general fund budget by doing it now, and the timing was perfect because we were retiring that
Yeah.
debt and moving it on. So it kept the tax burden for our local taxpayers for capital projects flat.
I understand,
So
but it don't mean it can't go lower. Is all I'm trying to say. Right? Like,
No,
and
it
I'm
could,
not
but I don't know
proposing
how
that
it
it
helps.
I'm not proposing that it do.
Right.
All I'm trying to say is that by pre-decisioning, right, it limit options more. And all I'm trying to say is that I'm just kind of against, less options. And I just want to just see the full picture is all I'm trying to say.
Well, I'm saying in my view, it's not an option.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that we promised the community that we would do it. And it doesn't have any bearing on the gap that we're trying to fill right now. So I don't know that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
one of the options that we would bring to the board to figure out
Okay.
our operating budget right now.
I do have a few other questions.
Sure, sorry.
And these are just, I think these are things you're gonna bring to us anyways. So I am curious, in the cuts, in the scenarios, I'm wondering, how many teachers and where are they?
Yeah.
And what would be the increase in class size?
Yep.
But I'm also curious about, I know we didn't fill all the positions last year. So where were those holes last year? And also, sometimes I know like when my kids were in elementary school, I always knew how many kids were in the class. Now that they're in middle and high school, I was like, how many kids are in your class? I don't know.
Right.
I feel like sometimes class size, we have parents here from elementary school talking about class size, classes. I don't see that from high school parents. And I know a lot of high school teachers have stepped up and taken on that 6th class for that stipend. So I think it's hidden some of what would have been an increase in class size at the high school. I'm just wondering how many teachers are doing that? So like if we cut more, how much more of that can we ask teachers to do? We've maybe hidden it for this year, but can we do that next year?
Right. We've done that analysis for the middle school
Okay.
and we're doing it for the high school right now based on everyone. I'll give you the information, but
That'd
we
be
don't, we're starting to do that.
Okay.
We might not need as many 6 classes as we have.
I'm
in
just
the past.
curious because I know that our high school teachers especially have really stepped up in that, but are we at a breaking point in terms of how much of that we can do? And then also, Jen, I don't know if I'm asking too much of you here, but like when we look at that history of the tax cap, there's huge variance with how building aid came in and all that, like, only getting the 0.55% last year. I mean, that was tiny compared to what we'd had years before. Do we have any, like, if you could think about any sense of what it would look like moving forward too, as we make decisions this year? Like, are we going to have another year coming up at 0.55?
That's a good question.
Right. So actually it's fairly predictable. Probably maybe just go because it'll be helpful aid. The tax cap calculation. So the tax-based growth factor, we don't know that for year to year unless we just have general knowledge of some development that's happening in town. Like for right now, I'm not aware of any large projects like the Amazons, the FedExes, the Regenerons. Okay. All those things have happened, right? So that would be something to look at if there was additional development from that perspective. So the tax-based growth factor, if I was projecting out, I would probably use where we're at now as our baseline, right? Then the pilots, those are a little tricky to get a handle on. I'm going to be very honest on that. But we have a good schedule. We have some good ideas. We're working a lot with the IDA to make sure we have clarity on that. So that is probably where I'd have less confidence. And if I'm planning forward, I probably wouldn't be, at least like next year, like I might be. Here's the thing. So sometimes the pilot expires. They don't go back on the rolls. Okay. And sometimes it's hard to figure out, like, how is that going to behave? And from my understanding, Rensselaer County is a little bit different in that regard than other county IDs. So that's tricky. The other component, the tax levy, the capital exclusion. We have a tax neutral project. Theoretically, that should be the same prior year, current year generally. So when we're looking at additional tax revenues, we're talking about that tax-based growth factor. So this year that provided $336,000 in additional tax revenue. Then it's about what's the inflation factor. So the 2% tax cap isn't really 2%. The allowable levy growth factor is 2%. So that's all based on inflation, right? So we're still above that 2% mark. So at the present time, if I was looking out, I'd probably assume 2% unless there's some sort of economic downturn, something happens and, inflation was like at pre-COVID levels in some cases, but so I'd probably keep that at 2%. That 2% compounded with that tax-based growth factor provided just under $1.3 million. Okay. So that's what we're talking about on an annual, like next year's tax cap, I'd say 2.69% unless something out of the ordinary happened with pilots.
Okay. So you expect it to be in the range of this year's?
Yes.
Okay.
But those are like the kind of things that you have to look at to say, how is that going to be different? And when the tax cap was higher, I actually just recently put the tax cap together for the last 6 years side by side to see all those changes. And that's where I saw, and what happened with compounding factors and, what influences when you make decisions on setting your tax levy at certain levels. So I just recently looked at all that.
That was amazing that you were able to do it off the top of your head.
Yeah. I know. All right.
I think I think we've addressed all my other questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Catherine. Any other questions?
So very good, very sad, but very good. And I appreciate you walking through it in so much detail. It's very helpful. What are other school districts doing? Obviously, they have to be hitting the same rock bottom. Are you?
Some
talking with
are,
other-
some are, and some aren't, depending on their age, depending on what their history of tax levy increases has been. There are districts that are in the same boat as us or worse. There are some districts that historically got a lot of aid, that got a disappointing amount of aid. Troy, for example, is one of them. But they have a good fund balance and reserves. When we, it depends on the size of the district. There are smaller districts that I won't name that are very small that have a $2 million gap right now, which is large for their size district. I think in general, I got a lot of text messages yesterday about the insurance rates going up. Is everybody else experiencing this? Yes. So health insurance, is everybody experiencing this? Yes. But the main differences are whether you're, where you stand in terms of state aid. There is discussion that the districts that were on the hold harmless list last year are going to get a minimum 2%, and that minimum 2% may go up to a minimum 3%. But we're above that, so we don't want that to decrease ours. But as far as the staffing goes, in terms of looking at the staffing and some of the questions that Catherine asked, we're working on, we had been given the board an annual report for a while of all positions in buildings and the classification of those positions. And a few years ago, we had it be multiple years so you could tie it back to other years. But we hadn't done that every year. So between Jennifer and Marty's office, we're working on that, and we expect to see that. So you can see how many psychologists do we have? How many art teachers do we have? I'm not picking on art teachers, but there's one right here. How many music teachers do we have? How many elementary teachers do we have? What's the distribution of the teachers across all of the buildings? Well, how many non-instructional positions are in that building? And you can look right down the row or the column, and you can see. We'll try to structure that in a way that you can look back at that and say, okay, well, what was our enrollment then? What was the reason, for example? We did this a couple years ago. Why do we add special education this particular year? Because we had more kids that were in with needs. And why do we have more counselors now than we did back in 2019, 2020? Because we deliberately added them because the kids had needs, so things like that. So, yeah. And then class sizes would be part of that. Class sizes right now are fluid. Schedules at the middle school and high school are tentative. And they kind of assume the staffing levels that are here now, and we'll be looking at that to see what would the impact be.
Are there any other like school lunches? Just as we gather all of the information to make decisions, are there some contingencies that we need to sort of plan for? Like, I mean, with a rollover budget, we're assuming, I guess.
So it's
reduced
assuming
lunches.
that CEP is in place.
Okay. And then, yeah, I think that would be helpful. Like if for some reason it's not, like, I think even thinking on Friday, some of the legislators were almost surprised that we were in the program. So if we're not, what's the increased expense?
I think the current program that was approved last year is good for
Then
3
it
years.
is.
Isn't it?
Yes, it's a 4-year program.
Right, so they were talking
So-
about whether
When
they were
we
going to put
initially were.
more, whether they were going to put more money in it to cover all of the schools, which was the governor's proposal.
Okay.
Right.
So all of our buildings are
Okay,
currently
correct.
covered.
Okay. Great.
And sometimes we can make adjustments
Mhm.
to cover certain personnel. Like, if you have money in the food service and you can fully cover the cost of the lunch program personnel, we do that, but we have to add in that every now because
Right.
Yeah.
more kids are buying.
Right.
Yeah.
Breakfast and lunch than
Yeah.
ever before.
Yeah.
And the lines are longer, the lunch periods are.
Same
kids are
amount
rushing
of
to eat their
time,
lunch
yeah.
Because.
Yeah.
By the time they get through the
Yeah.
line. But some of those adjustments could be fully covered in the school lunch fund, which is separate. Then.
And that is something we actually looked at last year. We were looking at, my concept is it's really important to understand the full cost of a program. And just learning a little bit more about school lunch, because at the BOCES I didn't have a lunch program. So we looked at what's eligible to be captured by that food service account. So our elementary monitors that service the cafeteria, not the recess portion, but that portion. We moved into the school lunch program, helped our fund balance last year, and it helped going into this, but it was included in the 24-25 budget. But that's one of the items that we reduced in 25-26. We pushed them to the school lunch program. I'd rather see that if the general fund subsidizing, that we have an understanding of what it's actually subsidizing, if there's a need to subsidize, like it was in the past. We have a driver that deals with food deliveries. We move that into the school lunch. We have buildings that buy cafeteria tables out of their building budgets historically. We started buying some of those out of the school lunch fund because that reimbursement rate was higher. It had capacity, even with staffing, increases. So we're trying to look at especially when in these challenging budget times, understanding what the true cost of a program is and really seeing what needs to be in what bucket is very helpful to see that picture. And even if reimbursement decreased down the road, it would be like, okay, let's keep all that. And then we have a real understanding of what the general fund may need to do to support that if those funding decreases happen.
You're able to isolate it and figure it out.
Yep.
That's great. That's good. I don't have any more questions, but just thank you. This was very comprehensive. As Michelle said, it's not great news. It was kind of anticipated, but it was thoroughly explained. So thank you for the work, both of you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
We kept the agenda limited to this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jeff, can we get this? Last year I got this nice little packet with all the detail from WinCap.
Yes, so that pretty plastic covered is actually the final that goes to the Jeannie, help me. That's a part of our public hearing presentation. So that's basically what's going to go out to vote.
I think we got a
So,
binder.
so a binder. So
Yeah.
then that piece, we're looking at providing that sooner. Mr. Simons and I discussed that we wanted to make some adjustments and stuff before, we.
You were thinking it wouldn't be very instructive to give you the binder on the rollover budget, but maybe give you the binder on the reduction, some of the reduction.
Yeah, so that we were just talking about that today.
When? Next meeting?
When? Thinking about for the 26th.
Okay.
Great.
Thank everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to a discussion item on the student ex officio member of the Board of Education. I know we've been talking about adding a student to the board, and I figured to give us an opportunity to discuss what should that process look like specifically for selecting a student. Wanted to.
So we had a committee meeting back in December, I think, to talk about this, and I sent the minutes out for everybody to take a look at. And there's another meeting coming up, I think,
Next
next
week.
week about it, but we wanted to capture the full board's discussion of this. We had talked in the past about, making sure that the selection of the student was done in a way that was inclusive of all kinds of kids that might be interested in doing that. And one of the things that was, and I also provided a sample policy with the Board of Education, New York State School Board Association. You can, the principal can recommend, the superintendent can recommend, there could be a committee that leads up to the principal or the superintendent recommending. It can be a member of the student government. It can really be anyone. So one of the things that Mike Harkin discussed in the December meeting is they changed the homecoming king and queen process in the fall. It was very, very successful. And perhaps this process could be similar for selecting. They had students submit a like an essay of interest. And then they had a little committee that evaluated it, and it was based on merit, not popularity. And
What does merit mean?
merit meaning, the quality of, they had a criteria, the quality of the essay, the genuine interest, the student, you get to decide what the merit is. So the student that was selected was, selected for her character, selected for her involvement in the school, selected for her informal leadership that she demonstrated during the year, and making sure it's an objective process. There's lots of kids that have opportunities to do a lot of different things, and maybe inviting some students to apply through a process. That was, and certainly a board member could be involved in the selection process, the principal and a staff member. I believe that's what we discussed, Mike, isn't it? Or something for that. Mike was there. And,
I think I was there.
He was there.
I think it had come up before. Did we talk about maybe two?
The junior and the senior.
Yeah, just because of the time commitment to have an alternate.
Backup.
Yeah. If they can't make all the meetings, to have two potential student members.
So, I mean, and my primary concern is just, right, like, so currently I've been doing a lot of research on like hiring practices, right? And how do you insulate and like how do you ensure, right, an objective perspective depends upon how do you structure, right, the criteria that, it balances perspectives, right, that everyone has an equal shot. It's kind of what I'm wondering. So I'm just wondering institutionally, the pieces specifically. So in I think like using words like merit sometimes it's easy to slip by exactly what it means, right? And if there's a propensity for someone to overcredit, through the way the design of the word.
Well, I think you need to have a rubric.
Yeah.
To define what merit is. It doesn't necessarily be academic achievement. It could be, citizenship aspects that would make the person a good person who would take it seriously. I think that would be up to the committee to decide. But I think, Barrett covers a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Understands the time commitment. Demonstrates that they want to have an impact as a student member of the board. Those kinds of things can be defined, and evaluating an essay that they submit or an application that they submit, they can be interviewed.
Is there a time that we're planning on starting the, like, the reason why I'm asking this because, so thinking about a process, right? Like to create a balanced process, we would need enough lead time to give enough thought, right, into the process. So I'm just wondering structurally, like what's like the rollout plan?
Well, I was thinking we're having that meeting. Maybe we could define the process of selection a little more concretely based on this discussion, and then you would have to between March, which we're in now, and spring, engage inform the students, all of the students, make sure all the students are receiving the communication that there's an opportunity for this. And then give them a deadline to submit an application. I think you have to have the person in by July 1. So have it by the end of this term, that who the student, maybe you can kind of mirror it along the timeline of the board election. And have, I'm just thinking out loud, and have the person selected by the end of the term. And then they would start their service as both of them, or, maybe both of them both the person and the alternate come to the organizational meeting. And then, they can rotate or they can figure out based on their own commitments. Who's going to come to the regular scheduled meetings next year.
Jesse, I think there's ways
June
to,
30th, by the end of the last day of school for the kids.
and I think there's ways to, I think like even instead of maybe one essay, it's like maybe just a couple of questions that they respond to so that it can address a lot of different types of students and their engagement level. I think there's ways to sort of
Yeah, for sure.
account for, different backgrounds that.
For sure.
It's pretty interesting because, to be a board member, the criteria is very little. I mean, 18, member of the community, and, interested in being on board. So, I think we have to just be careful that the kids are doing it for the right reasons. Right. And then they're going to be productive members of board in terms of input and then communicating back to their constituency, the students.
Yeah.
What's happening.
Yeah, for sure.
And
I
then
mean, they're really
once-
dying to stay the whole meeting.
One of the things,
So that's important. Gotta stay for the whole meeting, except for different sessions.
Exactly.
one of the things that, and you talked to me about this a couple years ago, Mike, board president, that we appreciate that the student council kids come and they let us know the positive activities that are going on. But one of the things that I would envision a student representative of the board who is not going to let you know what some of the issues or concerns are among the kids and how can the board help support them. A couple of years ago during COVID, the musical kids were upset, if you remember, about not, I forgot what the issue was, but they were concerned with the pandemic, I think, and a lot of things about getting back to an activity. And producing the musical, so we met with them. Wanted to tell you what their problems are and their perspectives are too, so that we can be, informed. I think there's some great things going on with the youth empowerment program through Questar, that those kids invited the guest speaker to take action and to be not be afraid to, that they can make changes. So I think that's really maybe it's more than just reporting, okay, we're having, I think that's great that we're having activities that are going on, but it's also, okay, here's some challenges. that
More
we have
balance.
Yeah,
as
for sure.
high school kids
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
I don't want to create more work for the social studies teachers, but this is kind of a great opportunity to
Yes.
bring that into the
Civics,
social
yeah,
studies
academic.
area of, hey, you want to participate, you want to become involved, here's a good opportunity. for you.
Yes. And I think if we had a student who's maybe interested in political science or politics or education administration, it's an opportunity for them to test those waters as well.
Yeah.
And I like the application process because it might draw out a student who isn't always at the front, but just kind of thinking about it. Maybe is afraid to go through like the election process in the school, but is less intimidated by the application and will maybe put their name forward.
I do want to say, like, I don't view this as an internship. I definitely appreciate that point, and I think it's really about how do we hear student voices, period, and just, like how do we get that out there?
I think from what you were saying, Catherine, too, certainly for those that are selected, if they were interested in that seal of civic readiness, I think probably those hours would fulfill that. And then is there a time frame? So if we, decide on, let's say 2 by July 1, are they committing till they graduate high school, or is it a 1-year thing? Was that mentioned at all?
I don't remember we talked about.
Yeah, we might want to consider that. If it's
Senior, it would be 1 year. But
sure, but like,
but
what if
if
we appoint a
we do a
9th
junior-
grader? Do they have to do it the next 3 years? We might want to consider that.
You might want to have a term. What's the term?
Yeah,
Is it
and
1 year?
and
Is
then
it 2
maybe,
years?
yeah,
you
and then if
wanna
they
have it
want to
that's right.
reapply,
One of the things we had talked about with the 2 students was like
A
a
junior and a
senior and a
senior, I
junior, and
thought.
then the junior would move up as sort of like a mentoring
okay.
thing. It doesn't need to be that, but that could be an option.
Okay.
Some of it's going to be challenging. They have, sports, they have
activities, right?
activities for, arts and music. So
Yeah.
they need to kind of understand and working.
Yeah.
So they're going to need to understand the commitment is.
It's also conceivable that a junior would decide they don't want to do it their senior year once they see.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
It's
they.
a big
it's
conversation.
They're gonna have so much fun. They're gonna wanna
Now,
come back.
would students also be involved? Like what's the extent? Is it just board meetings? Is it like the full scope, like personnel?
No, they
No,
wouldn't go to the
It's just
executive.
literally,
no.
that's what I was
They
thinking.
wouldn't go to the
Is
executive.
Is there-
No executive sessions.
Is there like,
I don't think they're permitted by the.
No.
by the
No.
resolution.
is there like a work group that's like planning this out? Like, we're not gonna plan it all out right here. Is there,
There's,
Yeah, there's a committee.
great, I
Yeah.
feel empowered for
It's
those
not
people
really
to
good.
bring us a draft proposal
Yeah,
that we
so
can
we're
then
good.
talk
So
about.
we're
Can we?
good, yeah.
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 Thank you for bringing it up.
All right, so there's no table motions.
You have to do approval of regular business.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Just trying to skip. I saw it said 8:25. I was like, we can't be there.
That was long ago.
So, all right. Approval of programs for resident children with disabilities. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. O'Brien, second. Ms. Steinbach, everyone in favor? Everyone's in favor. Motion passes. Any tabled motions? No tabled motions. Old business, anybody? No old business. Any questions or comments about the consent agenda? None. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Komersky, a second. Ms. Turner, everyone in favor? Everyone's in favor. Motion passes. Any new business? I know there was some talk and I don't want to belabor it here. I know we were speaking about a commendation process. We could continue at another time, but I just think sometimes, you know, that this would be a good time to kind of some of those items to put out in the air, you know.
I'll put that on as a discussion.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. And last public forum. Anything, anyone? Awesome.
Future student member of the board.
Absolutely. Start right now.
I don't know by that time.
Absolutely.
He's a good advocate for it, right?
Absolutely. All right. So last board forum, start on my right, Ms. Steinbach.
Perhaps this should have been old business, so I'll apologize if so. I know this is a very crazy time of year with budget and our next few meetings are going to be taken up. It seems like budget workshops, but I would like to discuss and bring back the ad hoc committees that we originally, put on this year. I kind of would love to know where we are. And then specifically with the engagement around the community survey. I know we approved that and wondering where that is. And then I would like to, by the end of the year, figure out the board policies and procedures ad hoc committee, and then onboarding. We have elections coming up, so I'd like that to be put in place before the new folks join or potential new folks join in July. And then I think the last thing is at some point I think that we had agreed on transition document, and maybe post budget we could get an update on that.
Okay.
I am working on that.
No doubt you are.
Electronic document shared folders for. Probably need a month. It's ready for prime time.
Sure.
Right.
So, thank you.
Ms. Phillips.
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. O'Brien. Ms. Turner. I didn't mean to interject so much with the capital project. I do want to say that, I know we have to look at staffing levels. It's not as far as possible. I like the idea of looking at everything we can and prioritizing that as the last piece, unless we're seeing items that we are operating above capacity at, where it's practical operationally to adjust there. So for me, even though I don't mean to, throw a wrench out there, I do mean to question everything, to ensure that priorities are set in a way that's aligned with, how I position myself. But other than that, no, I do appreciate everyone bearing with us, and listening. Mr. Mann.
Just a quick update. I forgot to mention that I did get an email from Dr. Cruz with the questions we revised. I'll email that out to everybody just for review. Any other comments? And then that'll be the template we'll use for next week. Okay.
Can I add something to that? Just a minute. Just a reminder to email back if you have any replies to the just so that, I'm not privy to the process at this point
Yeah.
regarding the confidentiality. So I just want to remind everybody that if you reply to Mike individually, if you reply to Bill, I want to guide and help where I can, but I also understand that you're entering into a confidential phase of the process.
Don't bring up that sore spot about the DOE email listserv.
No, I'm talking
Yeah.
about replying.
It's the same, it's the same difference.
Ms. Kowarski,
Almost.
all set. Ms. Martin, all set. All right. So that concludes our executive session. No executive session. Okay.
No, there is no executive.
Okay.
No.
I thought you said no executive session.
Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Mr. Buno, and second, Ms. Steinbach. Everyone in favor? Everyone's in favor. Motion adjourned.